Hello everyone, and welcome to another weekly report. The most attentive of you might notice that this video is a bit shorter than the previous ones. The ratio of me speaking versus just silence in the other videos was starting to bother me a bit. So this past week I've tried to record in chunks of just 1 hour, and then I compress that hour into approximately 1 minute. So each chapter of this video will represent approximately 1 hour of work, which makes it easier for anyone who wants to help to keep me accountable to figure out if I've been slacking off and scold me for it. As you can see, I started the week by working on my snowy cliffs painting again. And if it wasn't clear already, I'm not trying to make an exact copy of the photograph I'm looking at. I'm just using it to learn how things should look more or less. Excuse me? Okay, back to it. In the beginning stages of the painting, I learned a lot, especially since I restarted it a couple of times. But after a certain point, it becomes mostly repetition of what you have already done. I still want to finish it, because it's turning out pretty good, if I do say so myself. And having a finished project with many hours of work behind it to look back on maybe a year from now will probably be very helpful in the future. But afterwards I think I'm going to focus on shorter projects for a while. You know, to take advantage of the famous 80-20 rule. Something like the first 20% of your work is 80% of the result, so you should focus on being good at that. I also wanted to quickly mention that I know I'm not following a specific... Excuse me? That's going to get annoying. I know I'm not following any sort of structure or plan with what I decide to paint right now. For the moment, I'm mostly interested in building a habit. I will learn a little bit here, practice a little bit there, and make sure to have fun all the time. And when I have built the habit of showing up to paint almost every day, I will introduce more structure to what I do. Now let's talk a bit about the brush I'm using for this painting. I call it the basic brush because it behaves just like the basic brush from Photoshop, but in Procreate you'll find it in the airbrushing section. I think the best way to define it is as versatile but unforgiving. There's no texture to it, so it gives a pristine, almost creamy finish, but it doesn't help at all in hiding any mistakes. If you do something sloppy with it, it's going to look sloppy. Making stuff look finished with this brush takes a lot of time and patience, which is why I believe it's one of the best brushes for learning. So for the time being, I'm going to keep using it. I'll explore brushes with more personality and texture when this one feels limiting and boring. And that's all the time I had for my landscape this week. Next up, my first try at graphite drawing in Procreate. Here comes the swoosh swoosh again. One of my best friends got himself in a pickle and asked me for help. He's actually much better at drawing than I am, but he's also much more out of practice than I am. He has agreed to draw a portrait based on the photograph you're seeing on screen, and after failing a couple times, according to him at least, he said he was having the most trouble with the eyes and asked me if I could show him how I would do them. So I decided to take the opportunity to try the graphite brushes from Procreate, and even if it was supposed to be just a quick thing, I ended up doing several attempts and spending a couple hours working on this. Since most of the face is in shadow, it's a tricky picture to begin with. But the second time I tried it, you'll see, swoosh, swoosh, that it went much better than the first one. really didn't like my first experience with the sketching brushes in Procreate. They switch between doing fine lines and a wider tone depending on the angle of your pen. And this setting must be too sensitive for how I draw or something, because they kept switching even when I didn't change the angle of my pen at all. If I want to use them again, I'll have to go into the settings and customize them a bit to work better for me. My friend was happy with what I sent him though, so at least that is something. And since I was already in the zone, I kept going for another hour. For most of the drawing, I kept using the eraser to bring lights into the shadow areas, but towards the end I switched plans and made another layer and painted on it with white. I believe that looked quite a bit better than erasing. Also, since I was trying new things, I tried a shortcut. I filled the layer with tone and put it behind the drawing to fill in the gaps in my rendering. And I also blurred all the layers a little bit to make them look a little bit smoother. And that's basically all I had time for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next week. But of course, not before you get to hear the fantastic swoosh sound effect one last time. Wow, I talked through the whole video. I'm impressed with myself. Maybe the change of format wasn't such a bad idea.